Good morning. I'm very glad that you're logged in and going to be part of this conversation. This idea came to us after the deeply tragic event of George Floyd's death. And we, like all the rest in this country, had to deal once again with an incredible event of deep anguish. And we thought about how we should do that together and how we should do that as the church. And a lot of our thinking was that this is something that, in essence, our faith addresses all the time, whenever we gather. Every word, every prayer, every hymn, every song, every anthem, every text is all pointed toward a place of peace, a place of justice, a place of peace, all together. And as so many people have started to lend their voices to this, we thought about the best way that we should do this ourselves. And it seemed to us that one of the most important things that we can do is learn how to converse, learn how to speak, learn how to notice, learn how to bring this to our own voices in our own midst as a community of persons. And so we wanted you to have the opportunity for each of us to hear us as each of us addressed how, just in the course of the past several days, we feel that our work in ministry and the texts that we've seen and the prayers that we've offered address this situation, and then have you listen in as the three of us talk for just a little bit and begin that kind of conversation. And after that, then we'll have some time to take some questions from you. So we thought that we'd begin today by letting our preacher offer the first word. And so we're going to ask Joanne to begin, Michael will follow, and then I will follow shortly after.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everyone. In preparation for this Sunday, I went back and forth over whether to use that long but poignant reading from Genesis, and finally landed on using it because it seemed to me to help us focus in on what is common to us, and that is our humanity. Something that was given to us by God. And then I thought back to my first year in seminary when Eric Garner was killed by a policeman in a chokehold, which sparked the Black Lives Matter movement. And one of my classmates said to me, "I don't get this Black Lives Matter. Don't all lives matter?" And I said, well, as a matter of fact, all lives do. And that's very important. We must not lose sight of that. But for Black people at this time, after many years of lynching and other types of killings, there comes a time when one has to speak to the larger community and reinforce that, yes, Black lives matter, all lives matter, but we had to reaffirm for ourselves, I think, in part, that our lives matter. I remember when I was, 8 or 9 at Baltimore Friends School. Now, I'd been brought up to give adults, anyone older than I, the respect that they were due. I never called an adult by his or her first name. But for some reason, I think I had been sent to the business office on behalf of some teacher. And while I was standing there, not fully in the office, one of the staff members was speaking to one of the bus drivers. Now, you need to know that the buses were staffed with a driver and a maid. And all the kids who rode the buses called these people by their first names. This was totally foreign to me, but I later come to understand that this is how that help was addressed. But this woman, for some reason, was confused as to the name of the person who was standing in front of her. But what she managed to say was, she called a name and she said, "Whichever one you are." I was dumbfounded. And this past Sunday, when I recalled that memory, I wept bitterly for that man who was so humiliated. And that I could not, because I did not know his full name, correct her in as gentle a way as I could. I couldn't do that then. Those are happenings on opposite ends, if you will, of a spectrum, of how we don't deal well with one another. We don't honor them as human beings, either in how we address them, in passing, and at the moment of a horrible confrontation in a police action. But I was very heartened to receive a telephone call, or rather, I'm sorry, an email, Sunday afternoon from a parishioner here who spoke out of her confusion, her sense of ignorance about what was going on. She asked how I was doing, and she said she wanted to talk. And that meant everything in the world to me. And we did meet, and we did talk. And what I want to convey about what is important in honoring each person's humanity is to encourage us to see each other, to see using the heart, and to do so with what I have come to call responsible fragility and vulnerability. It means not jumping to conclusions, not reverting to stereotype, but being open enough and still enough to ask questions about what one might have meant. Or why would you say it to me in this way? When I hear you say X, I feel Y. Because that's what will prompt a conversation. That's what will engender a response, and hopefully a thoughtful, considered one. And ultimately, to lead one to see the person before you. Because to give that and to receive that is a great gift.
Thank you. And thanks for your sermon this morning, by the way, as well. What I hope to convey is I think the other side of something that we would recognize here, that the best way forward is a recognition and a naming and a hearing and a listening that is true and deep and honest, and it's something that is that we share. It's inherent to what we are and what God made us to be. God gave us the imprint of God's own image. The next step in my mind is the recognition of a common enemy. The common enemy that is then revealed after this Genesis story we heard this morning. The first rebellion in all of our history, our primeval history, the history that is a universal one, is the rebellion against God. It's a moment that is inseparable from the moment of creation itself. It's inherent to and intrinsic to our being, and the effects of that rebellion are played out almost immediately in the subsequent story, in which we see brother rise against brother and kill out of a moment of fear and insecurity, of a moment of being unable to recognize the imprint that God put upon brother. And the horror of that is twofold. It's an inability to see the person before you, and also an inability to recognize the God who made that person and gave that image. And so we recognize that the enemy is sin itself. It's something that is a wound upon our very being, and is the most common of all enemies. And I think you made a point in your sermon this morning of the sin of racism, the sin of that violence is in some regard to be with us. That even in our best efforts, that its final moment of being put away is the moment when we will know that God is all in all. And I think that can sound really disheartening, because it's then what do we do? This great enemy is so great. But I think, Peter, you said this maybe earlier this week when we were talking, that by recognizing the size of this enemy, we know how to begin the battle properly and to be equipped properly to confront it. And if we don't recognize how grave a wound that has been inflicted upon us, we'll never know how to stand before it. I was also thinking this morning, the hope is in the person of Christ, of course, that in God's revelation, God's own self to us in perfect love. We think about Christ as the great physician, that he comes to somehow heal this wound, perhaps even incise it as a surgeon to cut out this wound within us. And it's effective. The surgery is effective, but the work of participating in that love, that ongoing love, and that ongoing just act on our behalf is almost like physical therapy. That we continue after the surgery to acknowledge that the surgery itself was effective. And if we don't, it seems that we might acknowledge that it won't take hold, that it never could. Yeah, that's my thought. And so there's physical therapy to be done.
Well, and I'd love to add my own sense that initial fall story comes, as you've marked, so close on creation itself, and it's meant to inform us of how deep and how abiding that breach is, and we recognize that, we confess it, we declare it, and there's real courage and bravery in that, because it's one of the things that people hold against the church, this idea that we have to confess our sins, et cetera, et cetera. But if we know how deep it is, then we have no choice but to never be in a position above anybody else. The general confession is done in church so that no one has the opportunity to say, in any way, I have standing that's greater than yours. And when we follow the confession with the absolution and the peace is that recognition that we can walk to one another, to everyone who is there, and say, we stand on the same ground, at the same level as persons, and persons whose relationship should be in love and in peace, no matter what else is happening in the world. And to me, it's very easy, like so much in the liturgy, to allow this language to just kind of float past, it's done every week, etc. But to connect with what it really says, and to imagine if every voice speaking now had its power originating more than anything else from humility and love. From humility and love that then can reach out. And as you, I think, said so beautifully in the sermon, it's that love that generates the need for justice. And it's having that immediate sense that no one is really in a position to tell anyone exactly who they should be or how they should be, that there has to be something that's much more like a conversation that needs to happen all the time. I was mindful of a number of expressions in the church this week, starting last Sunday. The prayers that were done, I brought them in because I thought they ought to be reiterated. In one of the first collects we did last Sunday, we said this: Almighty God, look upon those who have been stricken by violence or disaster or by tragic grief, through adversity of circumstance or at the hands of others, or by their own unwisdom or misdoing, who eat bread as if it were ashes. The first thing that struck me about that collect when it was read last week was this need for God, as we ask appropriately, to look upon us. And I was wondering about that. It's sort of common church language that often can go by without real thoughtfulness, but what does it mean to ask for God to look upon us?
And then what would our response
Yeah.
be?
and as I was thinking about this, I thought, well, for God to look is to see. And for God to see is to care. And if God is going to see and care, then God is going to tend, to approach, to give, to embrace, to hold. And it's all implicit. Right? It's all inclusive and comprehensive in just that request. Look upon those who have been stricken. They are the ones who we choose not to see. Or we choose to see in a way so that we don't have to deal with their being stricken. We create excuse, etc., etc. But for God, there is this incredible openness. And it's simply the revelation of the person. Right? And there is an incredible freedom. The second collect that we went through then said this: take all hate from our hearts, O God, and teach us how to release it in the hearts of others. Then the sign, open our eyes. Open our eyes and show us the things in our society that make it easy for hatred to flourish and hard for us to conquer it. And then help us to try to change these things, and so open our eyes that we may be able to do some work for peace. That, I think that it was your appeal, that whenever we have this conversation, we can't immediately fall back to ideological positions or fights about politics or ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera. We have to be able to see the person. And it's only in seeing the person and doing that constant work that the conversation can begin to have meaning. Hate is a form of not seeing or seeing wrongly. This is what I thought, that hate is seeing something rather than someone.
Mm-hmm.
Hate is seeing a caricature, as you said, rather than this person who is here in this moment, in my presence. Michael, your word some months ago was proximity.
Yeah.
The importance of proximity, right? And really one of the most remarkable, stunning, tragic aspects of the Gospels is simply the way that Jesus, in all these narrations of stories, of encounters, saw the person. And it drove people crazy.
Yep.
Because they didn't want that. They wanted him to see the tax collector. They wanted him to see the prostitute. They wanted him to see the adultery. They wanted him to see something that would allow them to hold that person at arm's length. And in the famous story of the Pharisee standing on the corner, say, God, I'm thankful I'm not like that. Yeah. And the power of the gospel is over and over and over. I don't know of Jesus advocating any policies. Jesus came, in essence, to say, God sees us. And God, in seeing us, hallows us. I did a funeral yesterday, and these are words that are done at the beginning of every funeral service. I know that my Redeemer liveth, that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth, and though this body be destroyed, yet shall I see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes behold, and not as a stranger. And that is the salvation that the church talks about. Redemption begins, and it reaches its culmination in seeing. I just want to finish with this little observation. I was saying to staff earlier this week that the strangeness of this time, part of the strangeness of this time, is that I spend so many hours every day having to look at myself. I've never had that before in my life, but I'm on Zoom with all these meetings, and every time I'm on Zoom, I have to watch me talk. And for the most part, that's never happened in my life before. I see others when I speak, but I don't see me. And so there's this whole new odd, disconcerting sense of watching me speak as I speak. And I'm noticing things about myself that I never noticed before. And that, I think, is a really good clue for how difficult it is to see others when we communicate, right? What do we see when we look at others? Right? Our body is largely invisible to us as we speak normally. Right? Zoom has made it way too present to us as we speak in these meetings, right? But that gives us a really good indication of the powerful way that physical appearance plays into how we are understanding. And I think it's really beneficial for us to be a bit unsettled by our own appearance as we speak. Because it helps us understand the complexity, the nuance of communicating and of language, and of not only what we mean when we say it, but also what others understand when they hear it, and how that's all filtered. And I think that injustice arises through that myopia, through that not seeing, through that desire to, I want to build a world around me that looks like the world I want to live in, and not the world that necessarily includes you. And I think that the whole testimony of the church, it's at so many different levels, is how do we create a community that speaks and sees, honest.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
On to physical therapy.
On to
What does
physical.
that look like, though, Michael? That was an intriguing suggestion.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear some more about it.
This will be an incomplete thought, but for me, what is primary in this work of seeing, part of this uncovering of what may even be the next step, if we can call that at all. It's the kind of uncovering and the kind of seeing of neighbor and of God that happens, I think, most readily in the context of worship, in corporate worship, where we can posture ourselves before God and one another and recognize that that the people next to us are not objects, but subjects upon which we together can come before God and worship. And so that physical therapy happens at least once a week on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, our physical therapist would be mad we're not doing our at-home work, I think. All right. Yeah.
Say some more though about as we are together and rub up against each other and get a sense of each other's scent, if you will.
Yeah.
What does that give us?
One of the moments for me in worship, and I guess this is as a server at the altar and at the rail in particular, the moment that is just so vulnerable and precious is the moment, and this happens particularly well in this space because we have a communion rail here, but the moment when literally shoulder is against shoulder, the rail, when we are on our knees, receiving and stretching forth our hands to receive the God who comes to us together. And that no matter who you are, you can, the 3-year-old who is just learning to stretch out his or her hands, and the octogenarian who has lived faith so long that we, that the only reaction we have is to stretch out our hands together. Is that we're equals, we're equal subjects. That's beautiful. I mean, that's, to me, that's like, that's the moment.
When I want the people who are watching to know about, and I hope that they can appreciate something that you gave to the whole staff about a week ago, when all of this was crashing in upon us, and there was this felt need to respond. What are we gonna do? What are we gonna say? How do we act? And you, I'm going to say, I think what you said, and then I'm going to say how I understood how you felt, and then I'd like you to comment on it. But, because the first thing you said was, I can't speak to that now. I need time. And it was the sense of what I took from that was the sense of, we've been here so many times before. It's the anguish is that we can't seem to move on, and that there's this, or move up, right? And there's this sense that okay, this will be the news for a while, and then something else will take over in the news cycle, and we'll just fall back into the same old paths, right? And that the speaking that needs to be done is the speaking that should be done continually, apart from events. And that only when that happens can it really touch the fatigue, just the incredible heart heaviness of this. And you were so eloquent about that. I'm wondering if you can say a few.
The other thing that I felt a little at the time, I just didn't know where it was going to go, but seeing the world react to this, that there were demonstrations in London, I think, already, and New Zealand, of all places. And by the middle of last week, in every state of the Union, there was a demonstration somewhere, or march or some protest or whatever you want to call it, but the really pretty one was in Hawaii, and there were all these boats out in the ocean. But that it suggested to me at the beginning of last week that this was going to be somewhat different, and that this has caught the imagination and passion and compassion of so many people across the world. And that was powerful. What I hope does not happen in the next steps, because I've seen this happen over so many years, that, the Brown versus the Board of Education decision resulted in many busing plans and desegregation plans that got bogged down in the courts. Or we got to affirmative action and the response was reverse discrimination. Even having something of a question about Black Lives Matter suggests that somehow we have to be placed in positions of opposition, and we need not. And so, there have been police forces that have already adopted necessary reforms, but this is so much more about not using a chokehold. And to get at that without suffering these sad divisions once more, only to get back to a sadder experience that puts us at odds, at deep odds again, and pain and anguish, we have to talk through it. And that's what I was hoping for. And it was lovely that though the staff was in different places in our conversation, we held together until we got to a point. And one staff member even remarked on how unusual our experience was compared to what she's experienced in another place.
In what way?
That we could all be open with one another without fear and with respect. And everyone who wanted to be heard was heard. And I think seen. And I'd like to say that the same person who met me here to talk has invited other people to join in conversation. And a vestry member has even extended himself to me to say, I'd like to talk. So this is what we need to undergird this movement, to open it up and give it breathing space and space for the spirit to touch everything.
I also want to add, because I've never heard somebody say it, and I never heard it said so well. Not only in the words you chose, but in just the look of your body when you talked about this, when Michael and you and I met to think about some sort of response, which was, the talk needs to be so broad. It's not just about this one issue or this one issue or this set of changes, but as you spoke earlier about your experiences at school years ago, that the conversation needs to have real nuance and real exploratory depth and real empathetic interest and patience, and to build bridges in all the ways that we can that help us to understand what it means, truly to love somebody. I think about this periodically when I'm just driving somewhere, and it's generally for them driving somewhere strange. I don't know anybody. And I think, first of all, these are all strangers. I don't know anything about them. I mean, the grace would be if they could all be friends. And the other thing is that I think that they are not strangers to God.
To that, my mother would say about how to treat other people. You never know in this life that you will need to give you a cup of water. And that also came to me for some reason this week. John Donne's poem, "No man is an island entire unto itself. Each man is a part of the main." Wow, this is something from what, the 12th, 13th century, and it still resonates. It's still powerful. It still is who we are and how we need each other.
Yeah. The thing that just immediately comes to my mind is just how risky authentic relationship is.
Right.
And it's just,
but
it's beautiful.
But nothing valuable comes easily.
Yeah.
And therefore there's always a risk. I think it's the embrace of the risk, the identification of the thing in it that frightens one the most. Yeah. And grappling with that. And by the way, you don't have to do it alone.
That's right. Yeah, yes. That's a good part. Yeah.
You don't have to do it alone.
And on a day like today, which is Trinity Sunday, the language of our faith is that ecstatic language of glory to God.
Yes.
Right? Which is a recognition that God is of a different sphere than ours, different power than ours, right? And yet God has everything to do with us. And so in acknowledging the depth of the problem and the difficulty of trying to find resolve and keep it, right? But in the midst of that, there's also this beauty of coming into a place where in the light of God, we can get a different vision.
And exciting, because it's something new.
Yeah.
It's something new to explore and revel in and get energized by. I mean, the same old is boring, isn't it? New is, wow, and it makes the world larger and every other person larger.
So I'd like, I'm going to speak to people who are listening in. If you'd like to ask us any questions, feel free to use your chat opportunity on the Zoom, and I'll try to read them and see if we can get some appropriate answers to you.
And how about the quiz afterwards?
Yeah.
Oh, somebody asked if you can repeat what your mother said to you because you were speaking quietly in my direction.
Oh, I'm sorry. My mother would say, you have to be careful about how you treat other people because you never know whom you will need to hand you a cup of water.
And the beauty of that is, it's just a cup of water, but it's so important to our life.
Right.
I mean,
we can live without an awful lot, but we have to have water.
We need to recognize in one another that we are related at that level.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add? I'm waiting for questions to come in. I think that one of the things that we talked about, which was important to us, is that there's been a lot of response from organizations, corporations, et cetera, making statements about the situation. And then immediately there's been response back that criticize those statements because they don't reflect what is actually happening in the business and organizations that are making the statements. And it's language that divides quickly. And I think that our hope was to be able to give people the opportunity to think that their opportunity, anyone's opportunity at any time, is not to make a statement per se. There is a time for that, but the more important thing is to bring somebody into discussion and not lose that opportunity, and not lose the opportunity to see somebody better for it. Right? And I think that the hardest thing in our culture is actually to broach things that may be awkward, difficult, feel that they put us at risk, feel that anger might arise, etc. But I think always that there's such a grounding in our faith about how we should be able to carry on as people in need of one another, that we can find that way to have those conversations, and that's the work of love. That when it is done more comprehensively, but more quietly and consistently, then creates the circumstances where justice can happen much more smoothly, quickly, without the same sort of debate. That's my hope.
I think the big challenge there, though, Peter, is that in wrestling with what justice would look like in any given situation requires so many different voices necessarily. And managing such a conversation is an art. It's also necessary, and yet could be so fruitful and exciting to be part of, to witness, to have one out of many voices come to one voice.
Mm-hmm.
Can be astounding.
I'm going to ask you a hard question, which is, what is your perspective on diversity training?
Well, you can't do it once, which is usually what happens, right?
Usually what happens, yeah.
And I think there's too much of speaking to and not hearing from, and very little directed conversations. So I'm not sure that it moves the needle very far, if at all. I'd like to see a more nuanced and sustained manner of delivering this. Let me just say that. But workplaces and people have to commit to that.
Yeah.
They really have to commit to that, and it has to be valued at the very top. It has to be seen as something that may not immediately translate into the benefit at the bottom line in terms of profit, but I bet any company that takes it on and does it well and deeply will discover all kinds of things, and that it will lift them, it will make an example of them. People will be drawn to that, I think. Prospective employees, people seeking the good or service, if it's done well and it permeates everything that particular entity is about, it will be noticed and it will be outstanding.
Somebody asked about how overwhelming this is. So this problem, this time, this issue. I'm wondering if you have an answer.
I was surprised at how overwhelming it was to have lived this long and gone through it so many times. I was really surprised. And that's why I was so grateful to the parishioner who reached out to me. And actually a classmate from seminary called to check on me, and a fellow clergy person of this diocese called to check. You just wonder, I just wonder sometimes, how much of a fight do I have left in?
And I think I heard you say this morning in your sermon that some things we really depend upon God for.
Oh, yeah.
And my own feel, it's the only thing I can say, the way I feel about this, because it's so profoundly sad to me, is that it simply is, we are being forced to recognize, Michael, as you said, the breach that sin is. And that everyone would love a solution. I don't know if there is such a thing, because the breach is that deep. But what we do say is we have a redeemer and a reconciler, and one who gives us the hope that in all of our small ways, we can be witness to that potential for unity that will be ours at some point.
And
right?
hope will not fail us.
And hope will not fail us. And so I'm always astounded and amazed and moved to see communities that have suffered the most be able to give voice to hope that is so integral and true to their spirit. And it's not just a vision that seems nice that they're going to pursue. It's that God is working God's purpose out.
Yeah. Without it, there would be no point to get up and stay pushing. Yeah. I finally got there, but it took a while. It took a while.
Well, I'm going to draw this to a close and say thank you to all of you who stayed in with us. And I hope that at very least you can feel that here in this place, this community, under this Episcopal confession and practice, we have a place where we can take the steps that are necessary to nurture the kind of love that we should have, to be able to do love's work, which is to find a way to justice in small ways, in large ways, and every day in prayer. Feel that God is not only with us, but giving us a call to something, and pursuing that call, and knowing that whenever you are in worship with whoever is there, I said this earlier in a meditation this week. First of all, whoever that person or those people are, they are symbols of the eternal. And not only that, but they are the substance of our salvation. And that whatever we mean by that sort of heavenly realm, it's that place where we will see how much love we should give to each and every one of them. And if the church can practice that in all of its gatherings, we'll be in a better place.
Amen.
Yeah. So thank you all, and we're here every day by Zoom in worship if you want to join us. And And we hope that we can all move forward well. So thank you.
Just imagine